Welcome back, this time to episode 3 on Gemini, featuring the Messenger God. In the spirit of communication and curiosity, why not try leaving a comment this time? It really helps the algorithm. All of this is showcasing my Alter Oracle statue deck on Kickstarter, which you can support by going to the link in the description. And with that, let's get started. My sign, Gemini, one of the 3 deities of Gemini is KURIOS. And I take this from, many influence, really, primarily Mercurius of the Romans and Hermes. But I liked how it represents curiosity in itself, this messenger god of intellect and writing, communication, as well as commerce and travel. Hermodir is also the messenger god of the Norse. Hermodir, at least the Hermo part of his name, might have been something of a loan from, that would be Roman influence, like integration with Germanic deities, Germanic, Celtic, and Roman deities, for instance. There's a lot of conflation of the Romans, for instance, between Mercury and Odin, and the Germanic word Woden. When the Romans saw Odin, they didn't have quite a place for them because they recognize Thor and Thunor as something of a Zeus-like figure. They saw Odin as a wanderer, and his madness as a sign of intellect and of wisdom. And Odin also was seen as a ferryman of the dead across the sky, essentially. Hermes and Mercury are also given the role of a ferryman of the dead. They escort dead souls from their bodies to the underworld and then give them to Charon, the old man, who then takes them across the river Styx into the actual underworld. And so they looked at Odin and Woden in this sort of Mercurian way and often conflated him with them. I don't do that because I have a different place for Woden, but I admit that there is a Mercury influence with the Odin deity in my pantheon. I'll tell you, he is Odin I put in the cusp of Corvus between Libra and Virgo. The cusps I am giving different planets, not with planets of their own, but given to planets that are of other signs. So in that case, the character Wanderos or Vanderos, who is the Pandemonic name for that Odin character. And so Hermodir, almost something of a mix between Hermes and Odin, was maybe something of a another translation. One of the most widely understood, syncretisms in history is between Mercury, Hermes, and Thoth. Thoth being the Egyptian god of writing and wisdom, and also himself kind of a scribe and a judge in the underworld of people's deeds. The Ptolemaic Greeks, so that's under Ptolemy, who was one of Alexander's generals, who was given rulership over Egypt after the death of Alexander the Great, established a dynasty there in Egypt and began to syncretize Greek deities with local Egyptian deities and came up with a very diverse and interesting and dynamic pantheon. Really quite the inspiration for me working on this Pandemonic Pantheon is how interesting and nuanced a lot of the myths that came out of Ptolemaic Egypt merged different identities in very unique and interesting ways. And one of the most inspiring for me is this synthesis of Mercury, Hermes, and Thoth. Hermes Trismegistus, down at the bottom, which means Hermes thrice greatest, is a very profoundly important personality within the occultic traditions. And essentially, he is the founder of the tarot and also of writing itself. He's related to the Book of Thoth, which is this kind of book of life. One way to think of it is that when Thoth is writing his book of life for every individual in the afterlife, this book isn't made up of everything, all the minutiae and details of everyone's life. It's not written for every individual. It's a book of archetypes and ideals and stories that can be identified with any person in any lifetime. It's essentially like a list of ideals and potentials and archetypes that that person is or isn't fulfilling, and he was able to, I guess, decide whether people were worthy or unworthy of those standards and those ideals. It's a very interesting mix of that kind of afterlife obsession of the Egyptians and then the virtuous philosophical obsession, I guess, of the Greeks. Well, Metatron in the Gnostic Christian traditions is considered the scribe of God, who holds on to the book of life that again is used to judge every person when they die, and that also fits with kind of what we're talking about here. And so the story goes that this book was lost and secretly compiled or cut up into 78 cards that represented those 78 archetypes and of ideas and of story beats that represent the whole of human experience. This not only evolved into tarot cards and oracle cards as they're used today in divination, but also into regular playing cards. You know, you have the same kind of motifs going on. Playing cards take out the trump cards, they take out the major arcana, and they only have the kind of numbered cards, the four elements of like hearts, spades, and so on, correlated to the swords, wands, and so on. All of those representing the four elements: fire, earth, air, and water. Then you have the king, the queen, the page, and the knight. How this relates to KURIOS is that it represents more than just writing. It represents philosophy and categorization and classification. Through using tarot cards and divination, you can understand and comprehend and reflect upon yourself and who you are and where you're at. Make meaning of your life. It's quite fitting that I would be the one to come out with this deck of deities to do divination and tarot and oracle in the way that I'm doing here in this video, because I'm hermetic. I'm coming from a hermetic tradition of a messenger god, and essentially channeling the messenger god of curiosity right now before you by presenting these ideas and these archetypes that anyone can identify with. It's kind of meta right now. It's like, this is the deity that shows the deities, essentially. This is the energy that we are currently playing with right now. So moving on past that theme into expanding it to some other themes. Nabu would be the Akkadian and Mesopotamian god of writing and basically civilization in many ways. He's also the inspiration between the planet Nabu. Star Wars. I know I'm mentioning Star Wars a few times now. I don't know. It's just coming up. Nabu's architecture in Star Wars comes from some mixing with a Roman and Greek sort of influence. It's a very scholarly, scribal looking place. It's quite fitting, I think, for the character of Gemini and of the messenger god and Nabu. Hayagriva is also an interesting deity of Vedic Hindu tradition. He's depicted as a horse or having the horse head, and he's also described in some sources as having a other half, a evil twin. An evil twin or aspect of himself stole the four Vedas from Brahma and wanted to keep them from humankind. Hayagriva comes to represent writing and wisdom. Perhaps he's integrated that evil half to become a good and wise god who seeks to spread knowledge throughout the world. And that aspect of the horses there makes sense because horses are for traveling. And so often a lot of twin deities, like even Castor and Pollux and the Roman and Greek tradition, are considered horsemen, essentially. So there's the motif there of the twins, which again correlates with Gemini and the twins motif of the constellation. And often the twins in many cultures, I'm not going to go into all of them because that would be a whole video unto its own, but they often represent two horsemen if they're based on Indo-European tradition, like Hayagriva is, because horses are an Indo-European innovation, essentially. And then another one that I guess I struggle with a little bit is Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrian tradition. Now, so much of Ahura Mazda is Aquarian or is a sky father, because so many sky fathers are at the head of a pantheon, far and away and abstract and good, fundamentally good or benevolent. And so he certainly fits with a lot of that motif. But since Ahura Mazda is something of a synthesis, a byproduct of the philosophical thinking during the Axial Age of Zoroaster in Persia, who is taking the Persian pagan mythology and, in a similar way to Hermes Trismegistus, boil all of it down to several archetypes, several ideas, several different concepts. And Zoroastrianism is a very conceptual and philosophical and Gnostic religion. You can speak of every deity in their pantheon as a concept, as an idea, and it wouldn't be sacrilegious to do so. They are like an ideal that you're striving for. So in many ways, a lot of the pantheon I'm building here is fairly Zoroastrian in its ethos of like, these are manifestations, these are ideals, these are archetypes to be embodied. And so I felt like overall, on top of the idea that another word for Ahura Mazda is Hormaz and Urumazd, and it kind of sounds like Hermes, which I know is like a stretch, but there's something of him and his context to Zoroastrianism as the main good deity, opposed to the main evil deity, Angra Mainyu, that is as though Hermes was speaking to the people and trying to lead them in a virtuous direction through this writing of a new philosophy, a new religion. Now, another theme is in line with so many other deities across the world. Triptolemus is a very obscure god of Attican Greeks. And so Attican would be like the original Athenians, so like the people who lived around Athens, that founded Athens. And the Attican tradition goes all the way back possibly to the Mycenaeans, or possibly the rest of the Aegean, maybe all the way back to the Pelasgian or Helladic people. Triptolemus worked with Demeter and, I believe, Harmonia or Persephone at the time to spread agriculture and to spread civilization and to teach people how to live in cities and how to farm the land and how to use all these new Neolithic technologies that they had. Demeter, of course, we'll get to her being essentially the mother goddess of the Neolithic, spreading, agriculture and being the primary head of the gods during the agricultural expansion of the Neolithic. Triptolemus was like the proselytizing priest of this Neolithic movement. And he was portrayed in a chariot with wings. This kind of resembles Hermes in a lot of ways, with his, winged feet. Ultimately, he would be conflated with Hermes, but so much of that original traveling, enlightening deity was like kind of lost over time. Later on, when Zeus became leader of the pantheon rather than like Demeter, Zeus probably stemming from a more Indo-European source of the Mycenaeans or later peoples. Hermes evolved into just a kind of son of Zeus who was just a messenger of Olympus rather than this extremely important personality. Very similar deity to the Mayans is Kukulkan. And Kukulkan, interestingly, was brought up in the most recent Black Panther movie, the second one. Or maybe he had, another name, but was deified and had Kukulkan's traits projected upon him. He is shown in the movie with hermetic feet. And that's really interesting because it's as though they knew that there was something hermetic, something of a messenger god about the motif of Kukulkan to the Mayans. So Kukulkan is also a teacher who spread civilization and taught the people to worship and to build temples and was considered a traveler. How he got this wisdom is very interesting as well, because he was devoured by the cosmic serpent, the rainbow serpent of the Mayans, similar to Quetzalcoatl of the Aztecs. Kukulkan is not identified directly with this rainbow serpent, but instead is depicted inside the mouth of this serpent. It's not that Kukulkan is this alien power coming in, ancient alien bullshit. Instead, Kukulkan is a member of the Mayan people who is heroic enough, brave enough, and enlightened enough to go into the mouth of the serpent, this dangerous entity, and submit himself to it and try to integrate the wisdom of that dragon. And that's a motif that goes into so many myths and stories, integrating the dragon, integrating the monster, right? And finding profound wisdom with that. Serpents often represent great wisdom or great fear. The cultures that fear snakes and serpents or outright demonize them, they're afraid of questions. They're afraid of diversity, polytheism, and free thought. They want people to believe in a set of fears and sins and rules. Going outside of that and thinking for yourself, the idea of integrating a demon, of integrating your shadow, recognizing yourself in a monster, is very antithetical. That is considered satanic. That is considered evil and corrupting, right? Cultures that are able to understand the wisdom of the serpent are the ones that are truly able to evolve and become enlightened. And so that's a good lesson there, I think, that Kukulkan and Quetzalcoatl represent. Bochica and Viracocha are two other deities that in the Muisca and Incan cultures respectively represent a civilizing teacher who is essentially an enlightened ruler, an enlightened monarch of their respective people. Bochica in the Muisca is very peaceful and essentially utopic. He wants the best for his people. And there's a time, for instance, where he's at war with the thunder god and he's betrayed even by the moon goddess. Ultimately, he kind of overcomes that resistance. And unlike in so many other pantheons around the world, he actually succeeds against the thunder god. Because in so many other pantheons, the thunder god at his worst is a tyrannical, strong jock, essentially, who just beats everybody into submission, like Zeus. And later on, tried to justify all of his actions and his conquests by saying that he was a liberator and that the previous ruler, Kronos in that case, was a tyrant. And there's this twisting of the idea. Viracocha similarly is kind of the creator god of the Incan people in Lake Titicaca. Essentially tried to set them up well and wanted them to be successful and happy and artful and to create and to be beautiful and happy. And there were ways in which they kind of disappointed him ultimately. And he kind of just left. Essentially, it's as though he left and said, I'm going to go start with someone else. I'm going to try out another group. His son Inti, the sun god, comes in and finds something redeemable about these people and leads them to become the golden Incan empire that they eventually become under Manco Capac. And then throwing in a few other varieties in here, we have Caviria of Georgian and Kulmis of the Permian, Permian being a Finno-Ugric language. These are deities that represent a little bit almost like two tatis in the last one, tribal unification and communication and organization. As a messenger god, they represent the bridge between the divine world of ideas and perfections and ideals and the human world of action and practice. They represent not just communication between the gods and man, but also between people. And all of this together fits into, I think, a diverse and fascinating deity. It's very worth striving for, and I certainly try to strive for a lot of these ideals in my own personal life, and I'm trying it out right here in this by doing this YouTube channel, and talking about these deities and trying to put this oracle deck out there. I'm hoping to communicate something to people and help the conversation get started about these types of interesting things. Without our sages, without our mages, too many pages, burn them and fake it.